Right, one thing I'm going to do just in the solver here, just to help us out while we're working on this, is if we come into the solver and go into the solving, and then into shape, just turn off this dissipation, because that's why the smoke's disappearing really quick. This is set really high by default. If I turn that off, I'm going to turn on the real-time toggle as well and watch it now, and you can see it's not disappearing. Before it was, already gone. Okay, just so we can have a look. So again, it's not super interesting right now. Another thing we can do to help us kind of dial in our look, if you press D on your keyboard, go into texture, it probably won't have that much effect now because we're at really low resolution, but once you're pushing the amount of voxels that you have, this can kind of clip that and bring it down. And sometimes if you forget to do this, you're pushing in loads and loads more voxels, and you're not seeing it in the viewport, and it's really frustrating. And normally it's just this, so just turn that off. Maybe we'll just drop a quick light as well. Let's just go into our lights and cameras. I'm just going to drop a distant light, control and click on that. Okay, and go back into my, I don't have a camera, go into your, let's see, we're lost now. Let's go back into the perspective view. There we go. Okay, now we're seeing some shadows on it. Let's just turn the visualizer off on that. Don't worry too much about all of this. The transform definitely doesn't matter. We'll set up some other lights later on. Let's just press spacebar and F to visualize it. There we can see some shadows now. Just to see something. Okay, don't do that. That was a mistake. Dive back inside. Okay, so we're getting a bit more of that now. Did I actually turn off? Yeah, turn off that. And then, so let's look at, making this a bit more interesting. So one very easy thing to do is to add some noise to the actual geometry. So we can just add a mountain. Okay, and that just changes the shape of the sphere to something a little bit more interesting. You can play around with this. You can add some time to it or whatever. I'm just going to leave it at default. So that should give us something a bit more interesting. Okay, we're starting out with a different kind of form. After a while, it's going to take, it's just going to get turned into a ball again. We do spend a lot of time, I tend to, and I think most people do spend a lot of time with a lot of simulating, but especially definitely with Pyro, a lot of time kind of working on the solver before you get anywhere near the simulation, adding noise, adding different types of velocity, adding different noises to different attributes. Okay, playing around with that has a big effect on the simulation, regardless of what's going on in here. Okay, so it's important to take your time setting up your source correctly. So we got the noise of the mountain. Sorry, we got the mountain. Let's add a attribute noise. Okay, you can do this in a attribute VOP as well, but this is just a bit easier. And this is part of the setup by default when you use the shelf tool, I think, and this one as well. Okay, I think they all just use these. It's just more convenient. Okay, so obviously we're going to be wanting to work on the density and the temperature. Okay, and then we should be able to see it here. Zoom in on that. You can see something very subtle, so it's doing something. We can also take a look at the values. So now you can see the values are going from 1.1 to 1.8. Okay, and it's better to keep them between 0 and 1 before the solver. It's just simpler. So I think the reason is because we got this set to additive, so it's just generating a value and adding that onto what we've already got. So if we turn it to multiplicative, we get something a bit better. So we're going from 0.1 to 0.8. So there we got values between 0 and 1. Okay, it's a good idea to center the noise as well. So there you can see what it's doing now is changing that to between -1 and 1. Okay, so we got you know, obviously we don't have those values there, but we are going between that would be the maximum, right? Sorry, not -1, we're going from -0.5 to -2.5, right? That's why we got 0.35 and 0.4 there, almost. And the result of that, if we take a look, is that we get just gaps, we got holes. Okay, so if I turn off the center noise there, we can see we got value everywhere, but sometimes it's nice to literally take away so there's nothing being sourced at some point. So if we turn on this center noise, now the point you can see is some funny kind of dots, and that's because I believe that because we've got minus values. So to remedy that, if we come down to the bottom of this and turn on this post-process minimum, just check that, and there we go. As if by magic they disappear. So that just clips off the bottom values to 0. Okay, so there we've got values of 0 and then anything above that. Okay, so we've got a load that are set to 0. So it's not exactly a remapping, it's just cutting them off. Anything below 0 becomes 0, essentially. It's also good, so at the moment this is static, you can add some animation to it, so then it should move around, which is good. And that's pretty much it. You know, we can play around with the other values, but I think that will do enough for us. Post duration is how fast the animation moves. You can play around with the element size, bigger or smaller. Okay, I'm going to set that to default. You have roughness there. You can push that up a bit, maybe set that to 0.75. Okay, just gives you a different kind of thing going on. Okay, so let's see the results of that. If we move back out here, watch that. Now you can see, if you remember before, we just had one big lump. So now we got all these different chunks moving up and interacting with each other. So obviously it's still far away from being anything, you know, final. But it's, you know, I'm sure you'll agree that it's much more interesting, and that's without doing anything here, unless, well, in fact, we turned the dissipation off. We've done, you know, we've removed functionality from the solver, but we have something much more interesting purely from the source.